All right. Well, we're a little past 8 o'clock, but let's go ahead and settle in, get comfortable, and get started on a brand new journey. Hello, and welcome back. And welcome to a new location, if this is where you're joining us. This is our first night multi-streaming across both Twitch and YouTube. I did find, funny enough, that Twitch prefers a much lower bitrate than YouTube does. So that was fun. That was a little bit of an excitement to our day as we were getting started. So, dropped my bitrate by about half. And you know what? It started to work. Maybe that was half of our problems with YouTube not liking us before. 10,000 bitrate might be a little aggressive. Just throwing that out there. So, let's see if, well, honestly, dropping my bitrate so low, I might not have issues multi-streaming. We'll see. So, I think we'll probably be alright. According to recommendations, we're still above the typical recommended bitrates, so I think we're probably fine. I hope. Let me know if it's a little chunky. I do notice that the new Twitch overlay, or the overlay I use for the Twitch chat, is unfortunately a different shade for the... Yeah, exactly. I was seeing the same thing. I see it's a very different color. For the YouTube chat, I had it on the white font, and unfortunately, the default is the black font. So let me get an update here. Text. Let's do just plain white should be fine. And then we'll probably need to reload that. Let me make sure it's got a link here. Close that. Let's just play with OBS here. There we are. Close, reopen. Well, it may not like the fact that we changed settings midstream. It is what it is, really. So, let's just go on the assumption that chat will not work today, and we'll work that out a little later. What would a stream be without any scuff, right? We're double layering it. Brand new stream, brand new channel, and a brand new book. Oh, there it goes. Okay, it just needed a new message. Just clearing away the chaff. Looks good enough to me. So, let's go ahead and get started with our new book. Because that's why we're here, after all. All this extra fuss is nice and all, but we're here for the books. So, let's get started with one of the classics, commonly hailed as one of the first modern novels. I've actually never read it. It somehow passed by our world lit course. So I'm excited for this one. It is quite a bit longer than some of the things we've been reading, but I figured we've been doing an exploration of the public domain for a little while. It was time to get back to our roots. And I think we've talked about this before. I wanted to read this ages ago on the channel, but for the life of me, I couldn't find a good English translation. It was all in the original Spanish, and while that's lovely, I don't speak Spanish, and you know my foreign language translations, or my pronunciations, it would have not done it justice. It would have been a great comedy, I'm sure, but no. Wasn't to be done. So, I did find this one, and it looks to be exactly what we need. So, let's go ahead and dive in to a new adventure with Don Quixote by a name that is much longer than this, but we're just going to go with Cervantes. There's a lot more to it. And for some reason he's not credited on the cover of this translation, which is a terrible, terrible shame. Alright, cat, you are certainly in the way. I need to manipulate the mouse. Yes, hello, Simba. Alright. Set up a bookmark here. I had a bookmark. Just getting to them. So there's a lot of preamble here. But let us begin with Chapter 1 of Don Quixote. Dynamic cat, let me... It's cold, and the cats are extra cuddly. But it does make things a wee bit difficult. Yes. Alright. Chapter 1, which treats the character and pursuits of the famous gentleman Don Quixote of La Mancha. In a village of La Mancha, the name of which I have no desire to call to mind, there lived, not long since, one of those gentlemen that keep a lance in the lance rack, an old buckler, a lean hack, and a greyhound for coursing, an olive, rather more beef than mutton, a salad on most nights, scraps on Saturdays, lentils on Fridays, and a pigeon or so extra on Sundays. Made away with 3/4 of his income. The rest of it went in a doublet of fine cloth and velvet breeches, and shoes to match for holidays, while on weekdays he made a brave figure in his best homespun. He had in his house a housekeeper past 40, a niece under 20, and a lad for the field and marketplace, who used to saddle the hack as well as handle the billhook. The age of this gentleman of ours was bordering on 50. He was of a hardy habit, spare, gaunt-featured, a very early riser, and a great sportsman. They will have it his surname was Quixote, or Quesada, for here there's some difference of opinion among the authors who write on the subject, although from reasonable conjectures it seems plain that he was called Quijana. Quixala? This, however, is of but little importance to our tale. It will be enough not to stray a hair's breadth from the truth in the telling of it. You must know, then, that the above-named gentleman, whenever he was at leisure, which was mostly all the year round, gave himself up to reading books of chivalry with such ardor and avidity that he almost entirely neglected the pursuit of his field sports, and even the management of his property, and to such a pitch did his eagerness and infatuation go that he sold many an acre of tillage land to buy books of chivalry to read, and brought home as many of them as he could get. But of all, there were none he liked so well as those of the famous Feliciano de Silva's composition, for their lucidity of style and complicated conceits were as pearls in his sight, particularly when in his reading he came upon courtships and cartels, where he often found passages like "The reason of the unreason with which my reason is afflicted so weakens my reason that with reason I murmur at your beauty." There's no wonder the man went mad. Or again, "The high heavens that of your divinity divinely fortify you with the stars, render you deserving of the desert your greatness deserves." Over conceits of this sort, the poor gentleman lost his wits, yeah, no surprise, and used to lie awake striving to understand them, and worm the meaning out of them. What Aristotle himself could not have made out or extracted had he come to life again for that special purpose. he was not at all easy about the wounds which Don Bellianis gave and took, because it seemed to him that, great as were the surgeons who had cured him, he must have had his face and body covered all over with seams and scars. He commended, however, the author's way of ending his book with the promise of that interminable adventure. And many a time was he tempted to take up his pen and finish it properly, as is there proposed, which no doubt he would have done, and made a successful piece of work of it too, had not greater and more absorbing thoughts prevented him. Many an argument did he have with the curate of his village, a learned man, and a graduate of Sigenza, as to which had been the better knight, Palmerin of England or Amadis of Gaul. Armadis? Master Nicholas, the village barber, however, used to say that neither of them came up to the Knight of Phoebus, and that if there was any that could compare with him, it was Don Galeo, the brother of Amadis of Gaul, because he had a spirit that was equal to every occasion, and was no finikin knight, nor lachrymose like his brother, while in the matter of valor he was not a whit behind him. In short, he became so absorbed in his books that he spent his nights from sunset to sunrise, and his days from dawn to dark, poring over them. And what with little sleep and much reading, his brains got so dry that he lost his wits. His fancy grew full of what he used to read about in his books: enchantments and quarrels, battles and challenges, wounds and wooings, loves, agonies, and all sorts of impossible nonsense. And it so possessed his mind that the whole fabric of invention and fancy he read of was true, that to him no history in the world had more reality in it. He used to say the Cid Ruy Diaz was a very good knight, but that he was not to be compared with the Knight of the Burning Sword, who with one backstroke cut in half two fierce and monstrous giants. He thought more of Bernardo del Carpio, because of Roncesvalles he slew Roland in spite of enchantments, availing himself of the artifice of Hercules when he strangled Antaeus, son of Terra, in his arms. He approved highly of the giant Morgaunt, because, although of the giant breed, which is always arrogant and ill-conditioned, he alone was affable and well-bred. But above all, he admired Reinoldos of Montalban, especially when he saw him sallying forth from his castle and robbing everyone he met. And when, beyond the seas, he stole that image of Mahomet, which, as his history says, was entirely of gold. To have a bout of kicking at that traitor at Ganelon, he would have given his housekeeper and his niece into the bargain. In short, his wits being quite gone, he hit upon the strangest notion that ever madman in this world hit upon, and that was that he fancied it was right and requisite, as well for the support of his own honor as for the service of his country, that he should make a knight-errant of himself, roaming the world over in full armor and on horseback, in quest of adventures, and putting in practice himself all that he had read of as being the usual practices of knights-errant, righting every wrong, and exposing himself to peril and danger from which, in the issue, he was to reap eternal renown and fame. Already the poor man saw himself crowned by the might of his arm, Emperor of Trebizond at least. And so, led away by the intense enjoyment he found in these pleasant fancies, he set himself forthwith to put his scheme into execution. The first thing he did was to clean up some armor that had belonged to his great-grandfather, and had been for ages lying forgotten in a corner, eaten with rust and covered with mildew. He scoured and polished it as best he could, but he perceived one great defect in it, that it had no closed helmet, nothing but a simple morion. This deficiency, however, his ingenuity supplied, for he contrived a kind of half-helmet of pasteboard, which, fitted onto the morion, looked like a whole one. It is true that in order to see if it was strong and fit to stand a cut, he drew his sword and gave it a couple of slashes, the first of which undid in an instant what had taken him a week to do. The ease with which he had knocked it to pieces disconcerted him somewhat, and to guard against that danger he set to work again, fixing bars of iron on the inside until he was satisfied with its strength. And then, not caring to try any more experiments with it, he passed it and adopted it as a helmet of the most perfect construction. He next proceeded to inspect his hack, which, with more cortos than a reel and more blemishes than the steed of Gonala, that tantam palis et osophi, surpassed in his eyes the Bucephalus of Alexander or the Barbietta of Cid. 4 days were spent in thinking what name to give him, because, as he said to himself, it was not right that a horse belonged to a knight so famous, and one with such merits of his own, should be without some distinctive name. And he strove to adapt it so as to indicate what he had been before belonging to a knight-errant, and what he then was. For it was only reasonable that his master, taking a new character, he should take a new name, and that it should be a distinguished and full-sounding one, befitting the new order and calling he was about to follow. And so, after having composed, struck out, rejected, added to, unmade, and remade a multitude of names out of his memory and fancy, he decided upon calling him Rotenald, a name, to his thinking, lofty, sonorous, and significant of his condition as a hack before he became what he now was, the first and foremost of all the hacks in the world. Having got a name for his horse, so much to his taste, he was anxious to get one for himself, and he was 8 days more pondering over this point, till, at last, he made up his mind to call himself Don Quixote, whence, as has been already said, the authors of this veracious story have inferred that his name must have been, beyond a doubt, Quixada, and not Quesada, as others would have it. Recollecting, however, that the valiant Amadis was not content to call himself curtly Amadis and nothing more, but added the name of his kingdom and country to make it famous, and called himself Amadis of Gaul, he, like a good knight, resolved to add on the name of his, and to style himself Don Quixote of La Mancha, whereby he considered, described accurately his origin and country, and did honor to it in taking his surname from it. So then, his armor being furbished, his morion turned into a helmet, his hack christened, and he himself confirmed, he came to the conclusion that nothing more was needed now, but to look out for a lady to be in love with, for a knight-errant without love, it was like a tree without leaves or fruit, or a body without a soul. As he said to himself, if for my sins or by my good fortune I come across some giant hereabouts, a common occurrence with knights-errant, and overthrow him in one onslaught, or cleave him asunder to the waist, or, in short, vanquish and subdue him, will it not be well to have someone I may send him to as a present, that he may come in and fall on his knees before my sweet lady, and in a humble and submissive voice say, I am the giant Caroculiambro, lord of the island of Malindrania, vanquished in single combat by the never sufficiently extolled knight Don Quixote of La Mancha, who has commanded me to present myself before your grace, that your highness dispose of me at your pleasure. Oh, how our good gentleman enjoyed the delivery of this speech, especially when he had thought of someone to call his lady. There was, so the story goes, in a village near his own, a very good-looking farm girl, with whom he had been at one time in love, though, so far as is known, she never knew it, nor gave a thought to the matter. Her name was Aldonza Lorenzo, and upon her he thought fit to confer the title of Lady of his Thoughts. and after some search for a name which should not be out of harmony with her own, and should suggest and indicate that of a princess and a great lady, he decided upon calling her Dulcinea del Toboso, she being El Toboso, a name to his mind musical and uncommon and significant, like all those he had already bestowed upon himself and the things belonging to him. This is a fantastic first... Oh yes, thank you for giving us the warm welcome, bots in Twitch. Thank you very much. Ay. Alright, so this was a very fun first chapter. It has all the grandeur that really lives in Don Quixote's mind. It has the allure, the charm, and the adventure through every line. I'm really digging this start. So, let's take a brief moment. I need to first ban this. Yeah, banning that one. And then we will be just a very quick moment away. In the rush before we got going, neglected a few things of my preparation. So let's take just a very short moment, and I'll be back in a little bit. Alright, sorry about that. So, a quick spritz of Afrin later to make sure I don't get stuffed up. Damn cats tend to have a way with me. And shifting into some rather more comfortable pants. It's been a long day at work. Let's continue our reading from Chapter 2 of Don Quixote. Alright, sorry. Distracted now. The monitors all over the place now between the Twitch and YouTube monitors and making sure that things aren't going completely sideways on me. This is going to take some getting used to, I'm afraid. Alright. Chapter 2, which treats of the first sally of the ingenious Don Quixote, made from home. These preliminaries settled, he did not care to put off any longer the execution of his design, urged onto it by the thought of all the world was losing by his delay, seeing what wrongs he intended to right, grievances to redress, injustices to repair, abuses to remove, and duties to discharge. So, without giving notice of his intention to anyone, and without anybody seeing him, one morning before the dawning of the day, which was one of the hottest of the month of July. He donned his suit of armor, mounted Rocinante with his patched-up helmet on, braced his buckler, took his lance, and by the back door of the yard sallied forth upon the plain in the highest contentment and satisfaction at seeing with what ease he had made a beginning with his grand purpose. But scarcely did he find himself upon the open plain when a terrible thought struck him. One all but enough to make him abandon the enterprise at the very outset. It occurred to him that he had not been dubbed a knight, and that according to the law of chivalry he neither could nor ought to bear arms against any knight, and that, even if he had been, still he ought, as a novice knight, wear white armor, without a device upon the shield, until by his prowess he had earned one. These reflections made him waver in his purpose, but his craze being stronger than any reasoning, he made up his mind to have himself dubbed a knight by the first one he came across, following the example of others in the same case, as he had read in the books that brought him to this pass. As for the white armor, he resolved, on the first opportunity, to scour his until it was whiter than an ermine. And so, comforting himself, he pursued his way, taking that which his horse chose, for in this, he believed, lay the essence of adventures. Thus setting out, our new-fledged adventurer paced along, talking to himself and saying, "Who knows but that in time to come, when the veracious history of my famous deeds is made known, the sage who writes it, when he has set forth my first sally in the early morning, will do it after this fashion." Scarce had the rubicund Apollo spread o'er the face of the broad, spacious earth the golden threads of his bright hair, scarce had the little birds of painted plumage attuned their notes to hail with dulcet and mellifluous harmony the coming of the rosy dawn, that, deserting the soft couch of her jealous spouse, was appearing to mortals at the gates and balconies of the Manchegan horizon, when the renowned knight Don Quixote of La Mancha, quitting the lazy town, mounted his celebrated steed Rocinante and began to traverse the ancient and famous Campo de Montiel, which, in fact, he was actually traversing. "Happy the age, happy the time," he continued, "in which shall be made known my deeds of fame, worthy to be moulded in brass, carved in marble, limned in pictures for memorial forever. And thou, O sage magician, whoever thou art, to whom it shall fall to be the chronicler of this wondrous history, forget not, I entreat thee, my good Rocinante, the constant companion of my ways and wanderings." Presently, he broke out again as if he were love-stricken in earnest. "O Duchess Dulcinea, lady of this captive heart, a grievous wrong hast thou done me to drive me forth with scorn, and with inexorable obduracy banish me from the presence of thy beauty. O lady, deign to hold in remembrance this heart, thy vassal, that thus in anguish pines for love of thee." So he went, stringing together these and other absurdities, all in the style of those his books had taught him, imitating their language as well as he could, and all the while he rode so slowly, and the sun mounted so rapidly, and with such fervor, that it was enough to melt his brains, if he had any. Nearly all day he traveled without anything remarkable happening to him, at which he was in despair, for he was anxious to encounter someone at once upon whom to try the might of his strong arm. Here we see Don Quixote gallantly sallying forth across the plains. Writers there are who say the first adventure he met with was that of Puerto Lapiche. Lapiche. Is it Lapiche or Lapis? I think the former is probably Italian, the latter is Spanish. so probably Puerto Lapis. Others say it was that of the windmills. But what I have ascertained on this point, and what I have found written in the annals of La Mancha, is that he was on the road all day, and towards nightfall his hack and he found themselves dead tired and hungry, when, looking all around to see if he could discover any castle or shepherd's shanty where he might refresh himself and relieve his sore wants, he perceived, not far out of his road, an inn, which was as welcome as a star guiding him to the portals, if not the palaces, of his redemption. And, quickening his pace, he reached it just as night was setting in. At the door were standing 2 young women, girls of the district as they call them, on their way to Seville, with some carriers who had chanced to halt that night at the inn. And as happened what might to our adventurer, everything he saw or imagined seemed to him to be, and to happen after the fashion of what he read of. The moment he saw the inn, he pictured it to himself as a castle with its 4 turrets and pinnacles of shining silver, not forgetting the drawbridge and moat and all the belongings usually ascribed to castles of the sort. To this inn, which to him seemed a castle, he advanced, and at a short distance from it, he checked Rocinante, hoping that some dwarf would show himself upon the battlements, and by sound of trumpet give notice that a knight was approaching the castle. But, seeing that they were slow about it, and that Rocinante was in a hurry to reach the stable, he made for the inn door, and perceived the 2 gay damsels who were standing there, and who seemed to him to be 2 fair maidens, or lovely ladies, taking their ease at the castle gate. At this moment, it so happened that a swineherd, who was going through the stubbles collecting a drove of pigs, for without any apology, that is what they are called, gave a blast of his horn to bring them together, and forthwith it seemed to Don Quixote to be what he was expecting, the signal of some dwarf announcing his arrival. And so, with prodigious satisfaction, he rode up to the inn, and to the ladies, who, seeing a man of this sort approaching in full armor, and with lance and buckler, were turning in dismay into the inn, when Don Quixote, guessing their fear by their flight, raising his pasteboard visor, disclosed his dry, dusty visage, and, with courteous bearing and gentle voice, addressed them, "Your ladyships need not fly or fear any rudeness, for that it belongs not to the order of knighthood which I profess to offer to anyone, much less to high-born maidens as your appearance proclaims you to be." The girls were looking at him, straining their eyes to make out the features which the clumsy visor obscured. But when they heard themselves called maidens, the first thing, a thing so much out of their line, they could not restrain their laughter, which made Don Quixote wax indignant and say, "Modesty becomes the fair, and moreover laughter that has little cause is great silliness. This, however, I say not to pain or anger you, for my desire is none other than to serve you." The incomprehensible language and the unpromising looks of our cavalier only increased the lady's laughter, and that increased his irritation. And matters might have gone farther if at that moment the landlord had not come out, who, being a very fat man, was a very peaceful one. He, seeing this grotesque figure clad in armor that did not match any more than his saddle, bridle, lance, buckler, or corslet, was not at all indisposed to join the damsels in their manifestations of amusement, but in truth, standing in awe of such a complicated armament, he thought it best to speak him fairly, and so he said, "Signor Caballero, if your worship wants lodging, baiting the bed, for there is not one in the inn, there is plenty of everything else here." Don Quixote, observing the respectful bearing of the alcayde of the fortress, for so the innkeeper and inn seemed in his eyes, made an answer. Sir Castellan, for me anything will suffice, for my armor is my only wear, my only rest, the fray. The host fancied he called him Castellan because he took him for a worthy of Castile, though he was in fact Andalusian, and one from the strand of San Lucar, as crafty a thief as Cacus, and as full of tricks as a student or a page. In that case, said he, your bed is on the flinty rock, your sleep to watch alway. And, if so, you may dismount and safely reckon upon any quantity of sleeplessness under this roof for a 12-month, not to say for a single night. So saying, he advanced to hold the stirrup for Don Quixote, who got down with great difficulty and exertion, for he had not broken his fast all day, and then charged the host to take great care of his horse, for he was the best bit of flesh that ever ate bread in this world. The landlord eyed him over, but did not find him as good as Don Quixote said, nor even half as good, and putting him up in the stable, he returned to see what might be wanted by his guest, whom the damsels, who had by this time made their peace with him, were now relieving of his armor. They had taken off his breastplate and backpiece, but they neither knew nor saw how to open his gorget, or remove his makeshift helmet, for he had fastened it with green ribbons, which, as there was no untying the knots, required to be cut. This, however, he would not by any means consent to, so he remained all the evening with his helmet on, the drollest and oddest figure that can be imagined. And while they were removing his armor, taking the baggages who were about it, for ladies of high degree belonging to the castle, he said to them with great sprightliness, "Oh, never surely was there knight so served by hand of dame as served was he, Don Quixote hight, when from his town he came, with maidens waiting on himself, princesses on his hack." Or Rocinante, for that lady's mine is my horse's name, and Don Quixote of La Mancha is my own. For though I had no intention of declaring myself until my achievements in your service and honour had made me known, the necessity of adapting that old ballad of Lancelot to the present occasion has given you the knowledge of my name altogether prematurely. A time, however, will come for your ladyships to command and me to obey, and then the might of my arm will show my desire to serve you. The girls, who were not used to hearing rhetoric of this sort, had nothing to say in reply. They only asked him if he wanted anything to eat. "I would gladly eat a bit of something," said Don Quixote, "for I feel it would come very seasonably." The day happened to be a Friday, and in the whole inn there was nothing but some pieces of the fish they call in Castile atavejo, in Andalusia bacalao, yeah. And in some places curadillo, and in others troutlet. So they asked him if he thought he would eat troutlet, for there was no other fish to give him. "If there be troutlets enough," said Don Quixote, "they will be the same thing as a trout, for it is all one to me whether I am given 8 reals in small change or a piece of 8. Moreover, it may be that these troutlets are like veal, which is better than beef or kid, which is better than goat. But whatever it be, let it come quickly, for the burden and pressure of arms cannot be borne without support to the inside." They laid a table for him at the door of the inn for the sake of the air, and the host brought him a portion of ill-soaked and worse-cooked stockfish, and a piece of bread as black and mouldy as his own armor. But a laughable sight it was to see him eating, for having his helmet on and the beaver up, he could not with his own hands put anything into his mouth unless someone else placed it there. And this service one of the ladies rendered him. But to give him anything to drink was impossible, or would have been so, had not the landlord bored him a reed, and, putting one end in his mouth, poured the wine into him through the other. All which he bore with patience, rather than sever the ribbons of his helmet. While this was going on, there came up to the inn a sow-gelder, who, as he approached, sounded his reed pipe 4 or 5 times, and thereby completely convinced Don Quixote that he was in some famous castle, and that they were regaling him with music, and that the stockfish was trout, the bread the whitest, the wenches ladies, and the landlord the castellan of the castle, and consequently he held that his enterprise and sally had been to some purpose. But still it distressed him to think he had not been dubbed a knight, for it was plain to him he could not lawfully engage in any adventure without receiving the order of knighthood. And here we see the inn, with Don Quixote being force-fed the wine and trout and bad bread, troutlet, I should say. And yes, I am entirely at my own, like, my chickens have come home to roost on this one. Choosing this for myself, absolutely, it rests on my own head. I can maybe blame the translator for not giving closer approximations, but these are mostly proper nouns, for which there is no real translation. So, we're going to have to suffer through my poor excuse for Spanish throughout this, wherever things aren't entirely translated. Hopefully it's not that bad. I still think it's better than my Russian. That's a very, very low bar. I think I need to adjust my layers here. Because unless, you know what, where is it? The Twitch goal should probably be above the chat. And really, it's not terribly important to have it around anyway. We're just getting started. So, there's that. It is interesting. I've found, so I'm a passable hand with Japanese, and funnily enough, Japanese pronunciation serves me very well with Spanish and Italian. They have absolutely no relation whatsoever, but the pronunciation is closer to the Japanese than it is to English. Very strange, but I'll take my small wins where I get them. Brother, I'm a VTuber. There should be absolutely no surprise that I'm a weeb. Speaking of, I love how much Don Quixote is just chuní. He's Spanish medieval chuní. That's all this is. I love it. I love it. It clicks and makes so much sense. And the fact that the people going along with it have, like, yes, they laughed at him, and yes, they're making a bit of a spectacle of him. Well, he's making a spectacle of himself. But no one's really calling him on anything. They're just like, this guy, he's off his rocker. Meh, whatever. I'm here for it. I am so here for it. Alright, let's continue. We can probably get another chapter in before we take a break for the night. These are, despite the book being exceedingly long, the chapters are nice and bite-sized. So this, I think, will be a good book for our format, despite its prodigious length. Alright, Chapter 3, wherein is related the droll way in which Don Quixote had himself dubbed a knight. Yeah, you know what, you're right. Sometimes it's just easier to let them have their fun. As long as if there's no danger to them, and they're not going to really cause any stink, might as well just let it run, right? All right. Harassed by this reflection, he made haste with his scanty pothouse supper, and having finished it, called the landlord, and, shutting himself into the stable with him, fell on his knees before him, saying, "From this spot I rise not, valiant knight, until your courtesy grants me the boon I seek, one that will redound to your praise and the benefit of the human race." The landlord, seeing his guest at his feet and hearing a speech of this kind, stood staring at him in bewilderment, not knowing what to do or say, and entreating him to rise, but all to no purpose, until he had agreed to grant the boon demanded of him. "I looked for no less, my lord, from your high magnificence," replied Don Quixote, "and I have to tell you that the boon I have asked and your liberality has granted is that you shall dub me knight tomorrow morning, and that tonight I shall watch my arms in the chapel of this your castle. Thus tomorrow, as I have said, will be accomplished what I so much desire, enabling me lawfully to roam through the four quarters of the world, seeking adventures on behalf of those in distress, as is the duty of chivalry, and of knights errant like myself, whose ambition is directed to such deeds." The landlord, who, as has been mentioned, was something of a wag, and had already some suspicion of his guest's want of wits, was quite convinced of it on hearing talk of this kind from him, and, to make sport for the night, he determined to fall in with his humour. So he told him he was quite right in pursuing the object he had in view, and that such a motive was natural and becoming in cavaliers as distinguished as he seemed, and his gallant bearing showed him to be, and that he himself in his younger days had followed the same honourable calling, roaming in quest of adventures in various parts of the world, among others the curing grounds of Malaga, the Isles of Giron, the precinct of Seville, and the little markets of Segovia, the Oliveira of Valencia, the Rondilla of Granada, the Strand of San Lucar, the court of Cordova, the taverns of Toledo, the divers other quarters, where he had proved the nimbleness of his feet and the lightness of his fingers, doing many wrongs, cheating many widows, ruining maids and swindling minors, and, in short, bringing himself under the notice of almost every tribunal and court of justice in Spain, until at last he had retired to this castle of his, where he was living upon his property and upon that of others, and where he received all knights errant of whatever rank or condition they might be, all for the great love he bore them, and that they might share their substance with him in return for his benevolence. He told him, moreover, that in this castle of his there was no chapel in which he could watch his armour, as it had been pulled down in order to be rebuilt, but that in a case of necessity it might, he knew, be watched anywhere, and he might watch it that night in a courtyard of the castle, and in the morning, God willing, the requisite ceremonies might be performed so as to have him dubbed a knight, and so thoroughly dubbed that nobody could be more so. He asked if he had any money with him, to which Don Quixote replied that he had not a farthing, as in the histories of knight-errants he had never read of them carrying any. On this point, the landlord told him he was mistaken, for though not recorded in the histories, because, in the author's opinion, there was no need to mention anything so obvious and necessary as money and clean shirts, it was not to be supposed, therefore, that they did not carry them, and he might regard it as certain and established that all knights errant, about whom there were so many full and unimpeachable books, carried well-furnished purses in case of emergency, and likewise carried shirts and a little box of ointment to cure the wounds they received. For in those plains and deserts where they engaged in combat and came out wounded, it was not always that there was someone to cure them, unless indeed they had for a friend some sage magician to succor them at once by fetching through the air upon a cloud some damsel or dwarf with a vial of water of such virtue that by tasting one drop of it they were cured of their hurts and wounds in an instant, and left as sound as if they had not received any damage whatever. But in case this should not occur, the knights of old took care to see that their squires were provided with money and other requisites, such as lint and ointments for healing purposes, and when it happened that knights had no squires, which was rarely and seldom the case, they themselves carried everything in cunning saddlebags that were hardly seen on the horse's croup, as if it were something else of more importance, because, unless for some such reason, carrying saddlebags was not very favorably regarded among knights-errant. He, therefore, advised him, and as his godson so soon to be, he might even command him, never from that time forth to travel without money and the usual requirements, and he would find the advantage of them when he least expected them. Okay, so the landlord actually kind of being a bro here. Yes, he's taking the piss out of him by watching all this and letting it go on and just playing along. But at the same time, he's like, okay, but don't wander the countryside broke and with nothing to your name. Like, at least take care of yourself. You might be crazy, but I won't have you dying on my account. Actually kind of a bro. Don Quixote promised to follow his advice scrupulously, and it was arranged forthwith that he should watch his armor in a large yard at one side of the inn. So, collecting it all together, Don Quixote placed it on a trough that stood by the side of a well, and bracing his buckler on his arm, he grasped his lance and began with a stately air to march up and down in front of the trough. And as he began his march, night began to fall. The landlord told all the people who were in the inn about the craze of his guest, the watching of the armor, and the dubbing ceremony he contemplated. Full of wonder at so strange a form of madness, they flocked to see it from a distance, and observed with what composure he sometimes paced up and down, or sometimes, leaning on his lance, gazed on his armor without taking his eyes off it for ever so long. And as the night closed in with a light from the moon so brilliant that it might vie with his that lent it, everything the novice knight did was plainly seen by all. Meanwhile, one of the carriers who were in the inn thought fit to water his team, and it was necessary to remove Don Quixote's armor as it lay on the trough. But he, seeing the other approach, hailed him in a loud voice, "Oh, thou, wherever thou art, rash knight that comest to lay hands on the armor of the most valorous errant that ever girt on sword, have a care what thou dost. Touch it not, unless thou wouldst lay down thy life as the penalty of thy rashness." The carrier gave no heed to those words, and he would have done better to heed them if he had been heedful of his health, but, seizing it by the straps, flung the armor some distance from him. Seeing this, Don Quixote raised his eyes to heaven, and, fixing his thoughts, apparently, upon his lady Dulcinea, exclaimed, "Aid me, lady mine, in this the first encounter that presents itself to this breast which thou holdest in subjection. Let not thy favour and protection fail me in this first jeopardy." And, with these words and others to the same purpose, dropping his buckler, he lifted his lance with both hands, and with it smote such a blow on the carrier's head that he stretched him on the ground. So stunned that he had followed it up with a second, there would have been no need of a surgeon to cure him. This done, he picked up his armor and returned to his beat with the same serenity as before. The moonlight vigil here. I really like the art that's in this translation, or this edition. It's kind of... It reminds me of the art that was in Paradise Lost. The almost etching style, but just very detailed. Shortly after this, another, not knowing what had happened, for the carrier still lay senseless, came with the same object of giving water to his mules, and was proceeding to remove the armor in order to clear the trough, when Don Quixote, without uttering a word or imploring aid from anyone, once more dropped his buckler, and once more lifted his lance, and without actually breaking the second carrier's head into pieces, made more than 3 of it, for he laid it open in 4. At the noise, all the people of the inn ran to the spot, and among them the landlord. Seeing this, Don Quixote braced his buckler on his arm, and with his hand on his sword exclaimed, "O Lady of Beauty, strength and support of my faint heart, it is time for thee to turn the eyes of thy greatness on this, thy captive knight on the brink of so mighty an adventure." By this he felt himself so inspired that he would not have flinched if all the carriers in the world had assailed him. The comrades of the wounded, perceiving the plight they were in, began from a distance to shower stones on Don Quixote, who screened himself as best he could with his buckler, not daring to quit the trough and leave his armor unprotected. The landlord shouted to them to leave him alone, for he had already told them that he was mad, and as a madman he would not be accountable even if he killed them all. Still louder shouted Don Quixote, calling them knaves and traitors, and the lord of the castle, who allowed knights-errant to be treated in this fashion, a villain and a low-born knight whom, had he received the order of knighthood, he would call to account for his treachery. "But of you," he cried, "base and vile rabble, I make no account. Fling, strike, come on, do all ye can against me. Ye shall see what the reward of your folly and insolence will be." This he uttered with so much spirit and boldness that he filled his assailants with a terrible fear. And as much as for this reason, as at the persuasion of the landlord, they left off stoning him, and he allowed them to carry off the wounded, and, with the same calmness and composure as before, resumed the watch over his armor. But these freaks of his guest were not much to the liking of the landlord, so he determined to cut matters short, and confer upon him at once the unlucky order of knighthood before any further misadventure could occur. So, going up to him, he apologized for the rudeness which, without his knowledge, had been offered to him by these low people, who, however, had been well punished for their audacity. As he had already told him, he said there was no chapel in the castle, nor was it needed for what remained to be done. For, as he understood the ceremonial of the order, the whole point of being dubbed a knight lay in the accolade and in the slap on the shoulder, and that could be administered in the middle of the field, and that he had now done all that was needful as to watching the armor, for all requirements were satisfied by a watch of 2 hours only, while he had been more than 4 about it. Don Quixote believed it all, and told him he stood there ready to obey him, and to make an end of it with as much dispatch as possible, for if he were again attacked, and felt himself to be dubbed knight, he would not, he thought, leave a soul alive in the castle, except such as out of respect he might spare at his bidding. Thus warned and menaced, the castellan forthwith brought out a book in which he used to enter the straw and barley he served out to the carriers, and, with a lad carrying a candle-end and the 2 damsels already mentioned, he returned to where Don Quixote stood and bade him kneel down. Then, reading from his account book as if he were repeating some devout prayer, in the middle of his delivery, He raised his hand and gave him a sturdy blow on the neck, and then, with his own sword, a smart slap on the shoulder, all the while muttering between his teeth as if he was saying his prayers. Having done this, he directed one of the ladies to gird on his sword, which she did with great self-possession and gravity, and not a little was required to prevent a burst of laughter at each stage of the ceremony. But what they had already seen of the novice knight's prowess kept their laughter within bounds. On girding him with the sword, the worthy lady said to him, "May God make your worship a very fortunate knight, and grant you a success in battle." Don Quixote asked her name, in order that he might from that time forward know to whom he was beholden for the favor he had received, as he meant to confer upon her some portion of the honor he acquired by the might of his arm. She answered with great humility that she was called La Tolosa, and that she was the daughter of a cobbler of Toledo who lived in the stalls of Sancho Bienaya, and that wherever she might be, she would serve and esteem him as her lord. Don Quixote said in reply that she would do him a favor if thenceforward she assumed the Don, and called herself Doña Tolosa. She promised she would. And then the other buckled on his spur, and with her followed almost the same conversation as with the lady of the sword. He asked her name, and she said it was La Molinera, and that she was the daughter of a respectable miller of Antequera. And of her likewise Don Quixote requested that she would adopt the Don, and call herself Doña Molinera, making offers to her further services and favors. Having thus, with hot haste and speed, brought to a conclusion these never till now seen ceremonies, Don Quixote was on thorns, until he saw himself on horseback sallying forth in quest of adventures, and saddling Rocinante at once, he mounted, and embracing his host as he returned thanks for his kindness in knighting him, he addressed him in language so extraordinary that it was impossible to convey an idea of it or report it. The landlord, to get him out of the inn, replied with no less rhetoric, though with shorter words, and without calling upon him to pay the reckoning, let him go with a Godspeed. And we have the dubbing ceremony in the courtyard of the inn. All right, so we are through our first hour of Don Quixote, and it is a lot of fun, I must say. That you can definitely tell that this was a book written strictly to entertain. It certainly does. There's no pretensions. There's no allusions to grandeur. No. This is meant to be fun, and fun it is. All right, let's go ahead and take a short break here, top up our drinks, stretch our legs, and we'll be back in just a few minutes, where we'll continue from chapter 4 of Don Quixote. You're right, there is very little preamble. Even the very first chapter, while it was introduction, was fun in and of itself. Just like the absurdity of everything going on. And the narrator, being very tongue-in-cheek, is great. I think we're going to have a lot of fun with this, even if it does drag on forever and ever and ever. All right, be back in just a few minutes. Thanks, guys. All right. We are back. The cats have shifted position. Actually, they're both on the cat tree right behind me, so we might as well leave them both available. For those of us who may be joining on Twitch, I know there's not really any right now, it's just me and Akamos, but hey, I will go through the motions. These are Simba and Zoe. They are usually around. They'll pop up on stream every once in a while whenever they decide to join me on the desk. They're obnoxious. Sometimes they'll actually yell at us. Tonight they're quiet, so we'll see. Yep, I do. It is one of the great mysteries of the world. How we can love cats. Well, no, it's not really a mystery, it just happens. It is what it is. Alright, so let's get back into our classic of the evening with chapter 4 of Don Quixote, of what happened to our knight when he left the inn. That looks like someone is getting whipped there in the picture at the top. So there's some stuff going on here. Day was dawning when Don Quixote quitted the inn. So happy, so gay, so exhilarated at finding himself now dubbed a knight, that his joy was like to burst his horse girths. However, recalling the advice of his host as to the requisites he ought to carry with him, especially that referring to money and shirts, he determined to go home, provide himself with all, and also with a squire, for he reckoned upon securing a farm laborer, a neighbor of his, a poor man with a family, but very well qualified for the office of squire to a knight. With this object he turned his horse's head towards his village, and Rocinante, thus reminded of his old quarters, stepped out so briskly that he hardly seemed to tread the earth. He had not gone far, when, out of a thicket on his right, there seemed to come feeble cries, as of someone in distress. And the instant he heard them, he exclaimed, "Thanks be to heaven for the favor it accords me, that it so soon offers me an opportunity of fulfilling the obligation I have undertaken and gathering the fruits of my ambition." These cries, no doubt, come from some man or woman in want of help, and needing my aid and protection. And wheeling, he turned Rocinante in the direction whence the cries seemed to proceed. He had gone but a few paces into the wood, when he saw a mare tied to an oak, and tied to another, and stripped from the waist upwards, a youth of about 15 years of age, from whom the cries came. Nor were they without cause, for a lusty farmer was flogging him with a belt, and following up every blow with scoldings and commands, repeating, "Your mouth shut and your eyes open," while the youth made answer, "I won't do it again, master mine. By God's passion, I won't do it again, and I'll take more care of the flock another time." Seeing what was going on, Don Quixote said in an angry voice, "Discourteous knight, it ill becomes you to assail one who cannot defend himself. Mount your steed and take your lance." For there was a lance leaning against the oak to which the mare was tied. "And I will make you know that you are behaving as a coward." The farmer, seeing before him this figure in full armor, brandishing a lance over his head, gave himself up for dead, and made answer meekly, "Sir Knight, this youth that I am chastising is my servant, employed by me to watch a flock of sheep that I have hard by, and he is so careless that I lose one every day. And when I punish him for his carelessness and knavery, he says I do it out of niggardliness, to escape paying him the wages I owe him. And before God and on my soul he lies. Lies before me, base clown? Said Don Quixote. By the sun that shines on us, I have a mind to run you through with this lance. Pay him at once without another word. If not, by the God that rules us, I will make an end of you and annihilate you on the spot. Release him instantly. The farmer hung his head, and without a word untied his servant, of whom Don Quixote asked how much his master owed him. He replied, 9 months at 7 reals a month. Don Quixote added it up, found that it came to 63 reals, and told the farmer to pay it down immediately, if he did not want to die for it. The trembling clown replied that as he lived, and by the oath he had sworn, though he had not sworn any, it was not so much, for there were to be taken into account and deducted 3 pairs of shoes he had given him, and a reel for 2 bloodlettings when he was sick. All that is very well, said Don Quixote, but let the shoes and the bloodletting stand as a set-off against the blows you have given him without any cause. For if he spoiled the leather of the shoes you paid for, you have damaged that of his body. And if the barber took blood from him when he was sick, you have drawn it when he was sound. So on that score, he owes you nothing. The difficulty is, Sir Knight, that I have no money here. Let Andre come home with me, and I will pay him, reel by reel. I go with him, said the youth. Nay, God forbid it, no, Signor, not for the world, for once alone with me. You would flay me, like a Saint Bartholomew. He will do nothing of the kind, said Don Quixote. I have only to command, and he will obey me. And as he has sworn to me by the order of knighthood which he has received, I leave him free, and I guarantee the payment. Consider what you are saying, Signor, said the youth. This master of mine is not a knight, nor has he received any order of knighthood, for he is Don Holdulo, the rich, of Quintanar. That matters little, replied Don Quixote. There may be Holdulos knights. Moreover, everyone is the son of his works. That is true, said Andre. But this master of mine, of what works is he the son, when he refuses me the wages of my sweat and labor? I do not refuse, brother Andre, said the farmer. Be good enough to come along with me, and I swear by all the orders of knighthood there are in the world to pay you as I have agreed, reel by reel, and perfumed. For the perfumery, I excuse you, said Don Quixote. Give it to him in reels, and I shall be satisfied. And see that you do as you have sworn. If not, by the same oath I swear to come back and hunt you out and punish you. And I shall find you, though you should lie closer than a lizard. And if you desire to know who it is lays this command upon you, know that you'll be more firmly bound to obey it. Know that I am the valorous Don Quixote of La Mancha, the undoer of wrongs and injustices, and so God be with you, and keep in mind what you have promised and sworn under those penalties that have all been already declared to you. I'm having a lot of fun with the Don Quixote voice. A crazy night is fun to throw in a little bit of character acting there. So saying, he gave Rocinante the spur and was soon out of reach. The farmer followed him with his eyes, and when he saw that he had cleared the wood and was no longer in sight, he turned to his boy Andre and said, Come here, my son. I want to pay you what I owe you, as that undoer of wrongs has commanded me. My oath on it, said Andre.
your worship will be well advised to obey the command of that good knight. May he live 1,000 years, for, as he is a valiant and just judge, by Rook, if you do not pay me, he will come back and do as he said."
"My oath on it, too," said the farmer. "But, as I have a strong affection for you, I want to add to the debt in order to add to the payment." And, seizing him by the arm, he tied him up again, and gave him such a flogging that it left him for dead. "Now, Master Andre," said the farmer, "call on the undoer of wrongs. You will find he won't undo that. Though I am not sure that I have quite done with you, for I have a good mind to flay you alive." But at last he untied him, and gave him leave to go look for his judge in order to put the sentence pronounced into execution. Andre went off rather down in the mouth, swearing he would go to look for the valiant Don Quixote of La Mancha and tell him exactly what had happened, and that all would have to be repaid him sevenfold. But for all that he went off weeping, while his master stood laughing. Thus did the valiant Don Quixote right that wrong, and, thoroughly satisfied with what had taken place, as he considered he had made a very happy and noble beginning with his knighthood, he took the road towards his village in perfect self-content, saying in a low voice, "Well mayest thou this day call thyself fortunate, above all on earth, O Dulcinea del Toboso, fairest of the fair, since it has fallen to thy lot to hold subject and submissive to thy full will and pleasure, a knight so renowned as is and will be Don Quixote of La Mancha, who, as all the world knows, yesterday received the order of knighthood, and hath today righted the greatest wrong and grievance that ever injustice conceived and cruelly perpetrated, who hath today plucked the rod from the hand of yonder ruthless oppressor, so wantonly lashing that tender child." He now came to a road branching in 4 directions, and immediately he was reminded of those crossroads where knights-errant used to stop to consider which road they should take. In imitation of them, he halted for a while, and after having deeply considered it, he gave Rocinante his head, submitting his own will to that of his hack, who followed out his first intention, which was to make straight for his own stable. After he had gone about 2 miles, Don Quixote perceived a large party of people, who, as afterwards appeared, were some Toledo traders, on their way to buy silk in Murcia. There were 6 of them, coming along under their sunshades, with 4 servants mounted, and 3 muleteers on foot. Scarcely had Don Quixote descried them when the fancy possessed him that this must be some new adventure, and to help him to imitate as far as he could those passages he had read in his books, here seemed to come one made on purpose, which he resolved to attempt. So, with a lofty bearing and determination, sorry, lost track there. I had to look at the monitor there. Lofty bearing and determination. He fixed himself firmly in his stirrups, got his lance ready, brought his buckler before his breast, and planting himself in the middle of the road, stood waiting the approach of these knights-errant, for such he now considered and held them to be, and when they had come near enough to see and hear, he exclaimed with a haughty gesture, "All the world stand, unless all the world confess that in all the world there is no maiden fairer than the Empress of La Mancha, the peerless Dulcinea del Toboso." The traders halted at the sound of this language, and the sight of the strange figure that uttered it, and from both figure and language at once guessed the craze of their owner. They wished, however, to learn quietly what was the object of this confession that was demanded of them, and one of them, who was rather fond of a joke and was very sharp-witted, said to him, "Sir Knight, we do not know who this good lady is that you speak of. Show her to us, for if she be of such beauty as you suggest, with all our hearts and without any pressure, we will confess the truth that is on your part required of us." "If I were to show her to you," replied Don Quixote, "what merit would you have in confessing a truth so manifest? The essential point is that without seeing her, you must believe, confess, affirm, swear, and defend it. Else ye have to do with me in battle, ill-conditioned, arrogant rabble that ye are. And come ye on, one by one, as the order of knighthood requires, or all together, as is the custom of vile usage of your breed. Here do I bide and await you, relying on the justice of the cause I maintain." "Sir Knight," replied the trader, "I entreat your worship, in the name of this present company of princes, that to save us from charging your consciences with the confession of a thing we've never seen or heard of, and one, moreover, so much to the prejudice of the empresses and queens of the Alcaria and Estremadura, your worship will be pleased to show us some portrait of this lady, though it be no bigger than a grain of wheat. For by the thread one gets the ball, and in this way we shall be satisfied and easy, and you will be content and pleased. Nay, I believe we are already so far agreed with you that even though her portrait should show her blind of one eye and distilling vermilion and sulphur from the other, we would nevertheless, to gratify your worship, say all in her favor that you desire." "She distills nothing of the kind, vile rabble," said Don Quixote, burning with rage. "Nothing of the kind, I say, only ambergris and civet in cotton, nor is she one-eyed or humpbacked, but straighter than a Guadarrama spindle. But ye must pay for the blasphemy ye have uttered against her beauty, like that of my lady." And so saying, he charged with levelled lance against the one who had spoken, with such fury and fierceness that, if luck had not contrived that Rocinante should stumble midway and come down, it would have gone hard. Little bit of buffering there. I think we're okay. No drop frames. This might just be the first indication of some problems with the multi-stream, or it could just be that shit happens. I'm gonna go with the latter. Comcast doing me dirty, I think, is all it was. Alright, so... where were we? The Rocinante tripped. Okay. And so saying, he charged with levelled lance against the one who had spoken, with such fury and fierceness that, if luck had not contrived that Rocinante should stumble midway and come down, it would have gone hard with the rash trader. Down went Rocinante, and over went his master, rolling along the ground for some distance, and when he tried to rise, he was unable. So encumbered was he with lance, buckler, spurs, helmet, and the weight of his old armor, and all the while he was struggling to get up, saying, "Fly not, cowards and caitiffs! Stay, for not by my fault, but my horses am I stretched here." And here we see Don Quixote laying on the ground, the horse next to him, in the middle of all the traders, and them all wondering
What the hell is this madman doing?
One of the muleteers in attendance, who could not have had much good nature in him, hearing the poor prostrate man blustering in this style, was unable to refrain from giving him an answer on his ribs. And coming up to him, he seized his lance, and having broken it in pieces with one of them, he began so to belabor our Don Quixote that, notwithstanding and in spite of his armor, he milled him like a measure of wheat. His masters called out not to lay on so hard and to leave him alone, but the muleteer's blood was up, and he did not care to drop the game until he had vented the rest of his wrath. And, gathering up the remaining fragments of the lance, he finished with a discharge upon the unhappy victim, who, all through the storm of sticks that rained on him, never ceased threatening heaven and earth and the brigands, for such they seemed to him. At last, the muleteer was tired, and the traders continued their journey, taking with them matter for talk about the poor fellow who had been cudgeled. He, when he found himself alone, made another effort to rise, but if he was unable when whole and sound, how was he to rise after having been thrashed and well nigh knocked to pieces? And yet he esteemed himself fortunate, as it seemed to him that this was a regular knight-errant's mishap, and entirely, he considered, the fault of his horse. Blame the horse, yeah. However, battered in body as he was, to rise was beyond his power. Very, very tired and worn out, Don Quixote here. And the horse just stumbling up over on the side. So, he's had some misadventures already, between knocking the snot out of a couple baggage carriers at the inn on the eve of his dubbing, to harassing a farmer, and as soon as he leaves, the farmer giving the poor farmhand much more than he was originally planning on giving him. And now getting his ass handed to him by some caravan guards, essentially, when his horse tripped and fell. This night is off to an auspicious start. Let's continue. We can probably get another 2 chapters in at this rate. We're making pretty good progress, honestly. This is an exceptionally long book. I expect this will probably have about 20 sessions, honestly. But that's fine. Kind of reminds me when we did Three Musketeers or Mysterious Island. It just keeps going on and on. But this is fun. Maybe we'll interrupt it with parts with different books as we go through, just to break the routine. Anyway, Chapter 5, in which the narrative of our knight's mishap is continued. Finding then that, in fact, he could not move, he thought himself of having recourse to his usual remedy. Oh. Hello, hello. Let's see. Which was to think of some passage in his books, and his craze brought to his mind that about Baldwin and the Marquis of Mantua, when Carlotto left him wounded on the mountainside. A story known by heart by the children, not forgotten by the young men, and lauded and even believed by the old folk. And, for all that, not a whit truer than the miracles of Mahomet. This seemed to him to fit exactly the case in which he found himself. So, making a show of severe suffering. He began to roll on the ground, and with a feeble breath repeat the very words which the wounded knight of the wood is said to have uttered. "Where art thou, lady mine, that thou my sorrow dost not rue? Thou canst not know it, lady mine, or else thou art untrue." And so he went on with the ballad, as far as the lines, "O noble Marquis of Mantua, my uncle and liege lord." As chance would have it, when he had got to this line, there happened to come by a peasant from his own village, a neighbor of his, who had been with a load of wheat to the mill. And he, seeing the man stretched there, came up to him and asked him who he was, and what was the matter with him that he complained so dolefully. Don Quixote was firmly persuaded that this was the Marquis of Mantua, his uncle. So the only answer he made was to go on with his ballad, in which he told the tale of his misfortune, and of the loves of the emperor's son and his wife, all exactly as the ballad sings it. The peasant stood amazed at hearing such nonsense, and, relieving him of the visor, already battered to pieces by blows, he wiped his face, which was covered with dust. And as soon as he had done so, he recognized him, and said, "Señor Quixada," or so he appears to have been called when he was in his senses, and had not yet changed from a quiet country gentleman into a knight-errant.
"Who has brought your worship to this pass?"
But to all questions, the other only went on with his ballad. Seeing this, the good man removed as well as he could his breastplate and backpiece, to see if he had any wound. He could perceive no blood, nor any mark whatever. He then contrived to raise him from the ground, and with no little difficulty hoisted him upon his ass, which seemed to him to be the easiest mount for him, and collecting the arms, even to the splinters of the lance, he tied them on Rocinante, and, leading him by the bridle, and the ass by the halter, he took the road for the village. Very sad to hear what absurd stuff Don Quixote was talking. Ah, yes, the neighbors are full of shame already. We see the valiant rescue in progress here. Nor was Don Quixote less so, for what with blows and bruises, he could not sit upright on the ass, and from time to time he sent up sighs to heaven, so that once more he drove the peasant to ask what ailed him, and it could have been only the devil himself that put into his head tales to match his own adventures. For now, forgetting Baldwin, he bethought himself of the Moor of Abindarez, when the Alcaide of Antequera, Rodrigo de Narvaez, took him prisoner and carried him away to his castle, so that when the peasant again asked him how he was and what ailed him, he gave him for reply the same words and phrases that the captive Abindarez gave to Rodrigo de Narvaez, just as he had read the story in the Diana of Jorge de Montemayor, where it is written, applying it to his own case so aptly that the peasant went along cursing his fate that he had had to listen to such a lot of nonsense, from which, however, he came to the conclusion that his neighbor was mad, and so made all haste to reach the village to escape the wearisomeness of his harangue of Don Quixote's, who, at the end of it, said, "Señor Don Rodrigo de Narvaez, your worship must know that this fair Zarifa I have mentioned is now the lovely Dulcinea del Toboso, for whom I have done, am doing, and will do the most famous deeds of chivalry that in this world have ever been seen, are to be seen, or ever shall be seen." To this the peasant answered, "Señor, sinner that I am, cannot your worship see that I am not
Don Rodrigo de Narvaez, nor the Marquis of Mantua, but Pedro Alonso, your neighbour, and that your worship is neither Baldwin nor Albindarez, but the worthy gentleman, Signor Quixote.
I know who I am, replied Don Quixote, but I know that I may not be only those I have named, but all of the 12 peers of France, and even all the 9 worthies, since my achievements surpass all that they have done altogether, and each of them on his own account.
And he's gonna kind of losing it there. Well, okay, we can't say losing it. He's done lost it. With this talk, and more of the same kind, they reached the village, just as night was beginning to fall. For the peasant waited until it was a little later that the belabored gentleman might not be seen riding in such a miserable trim. When it was what seemed to him the proper time, he entered the village and went to Don Quixote's house, which he found all in confusion, and there were the curate and the village barber, who were great friends of Don Quixote, and his housekeeper, who was saying to them in a loud voice, "What does your worship think can have befallen my master, Signor Vicente Pedro Perez?" For so the curate was called. "It is 3 days now since anything has been seen of him, or the hack, or the buckler, lance, or armor. Miserable me, I am certain of it, and it is as true as that I was born to die, that these accursed books of chivalry he has, and has gotten into the way of reading so constantly, have upset his reason. For now I remember him often, hearing him saying to himself that he would turn knight-errant, and go all over the world in quest of adventures. To the devil and Barabbas with such books, that have brought him to ruin in this way. The finest understanding there was in all La Mancha." The niece said the same and more. "You must know, Master Nicholas," for that was the main name of the barber, "it was often my uncle's way to stay 2 days and nights together, poring over those unholy books of misadventures, after which he would fling the book away and snatch up his sword and fall to slashing the walls. And when he was tired out, he would say he had killed 4 giants, like 4 towers, and the sweat that flowed from him when he was weary, he said, was the blood of the wounds he had received in battle. And then he would drink a great jug of cold water and become calm and quiet, saying that this water was a most precious potion, which the sage Esquif, a great magician and friend of his, had brought him. But I take all the blame upon myself for never having told your worships of my uncle's vagaries, that you might put a stop to them before things had come to this pass, and burn all these accursed books. For he has a great number, that richly deserve to be burned like heretics." "So say I too," said the curate, "and by my faith, tomorrow shall not pass without public judgment upon them, and may they be condemned to the flames, lest they lead those that read to behave as my good friend seems to have behaved." All this the peasant heard, and from it he understood at last what was the matter with his neighbour. So he began calling aloud, "Open, your worships, to Signor Baldwin, and to Signor the Marquis of Mantua, who comes badly wounded, and to Signor Albindarez the Moor, whom the valiant Rodrigo de Narvaez, the Alcaide of Antequera, brings captive." At these words they all hurried out, and when they recognized their friend, master, and uncle, who had not yet dismounted from the ass because he could not, they ran to embrace him. "Hold," said he, "for I am badly wounded, through my horse's fault. Carry me to bed, and if possible, send for the wise Urganda to cure and to see to my wounds." "See there, play on it," cried the housekeeper at this. "Did not my heart tell the truth as to which foot my master went lame of? To bed with your worship at once, and we will contrive to cure you here without fetching that Urganda. A curse, I say once more, and 100 times more, on those books of chivalry that have brought your worship to such a pass." They carried him to bed at once, and after searching for his wounds could find none. But he said they were all bruises from having had a severe fall with his horse Rocinante, when in combat with 10 giants, the biggest and the boldest to be found on earth.
So, said the curate. Are there giants in the dance? By the sign of the cross, I will burn them tomorrow before the day is over. They put a host of questions to Don Quixote, but his only answer to all was give him something to eat and leave him to sleep. That was what he needed most. They did so, and the curate questioned the peasant at great length as to how he had found Don Quixote. He told him, and the nonsense he had talked when found, and on the way home, all which made the licentiate the more eager to do what he did the next day, which was to summon his friend the barber, Master Nicholas, and go with him to Don Quixote's house. Well, now we're getting into the point where people that know him realize he's gone well and goodly round the bend. But it probably will not take long for Don Quixote to go off on another adventure, leaving everyone behind, I'm sure. So, let's try and get through one more chapter tonight. We'll probably run over a little bit, but we started late, so meh. Chapter 6. Oh, am I buffering again? Nope, just a little bit of a pause there. Well, you know, it's funny. Since I dropped the bitrate to, half of what it was before, we haven't dropped any frames. We had a little bit of buffering here and there, but I blame those on YouTube. But I think many and most of our problems back before might have been the fact that I had a slightly overly ambitious bitrate set. Oops. All right, so Chapter 6 of the diverting and important scrutiny which the curate and the barber made in the library of our ingenious gentleman. He was still sleeping, so the curate asked the niece for the keys of the room where the books, the authors of all the mischief, were, and right willingly she gave them. They all went in, the housekeeper with them, and found more than 100 volumes of big books, very well bound, and some other small ones. The moment the housekeeper saw them, she turned about and ran out of the room and came back immediately with a saucer of holy water and a sprinkler, saying, "Here, your worship, Signor Licentiate, sprinkle this room, and don't give any magician of the many there are in these books to bewitch us in revenge for our design of banishing them from the world." The simplicity of the housekeeper made the licentiate laugh, and he directed the barber to give him the books one by one to see what they were about, as there might be some to be found among them that did not deserve the penalty of fire. "No," said the niece, "there is no reason for showing mercy to any of them. They have every one of them done mischief. Better fling them out of the window into the court and make a pile of them and set fire to them, or else carry them into the yard, and there a bonfire can be made without the smoke giving any annoyance." The housekeeper said the same. So eager were they both for the slaughter of those innocents. But the curate would not agree to it without first reading, at any rate, the titles. The first that Master Nicholas put into his hand was the 4 books of Amadis of Gaul. "This seems a mysterious thing," said the curate, "for, as I have heard say, this was the first book of chivalry printed in Spain, and from this all the others derive their birth and origin. So it seems to me that we ought inexorably to condemn it to the flames as the founder of so vile a sect." "Nay, sir," said the barber, "I too have heard say that this is the best of all the books of this kind that have been written, and so, as something singular in its line, it ought to be pardoned." "True," said the curate, "and for that reason let his life be spared for the present. Let us see that other which is next to it." "It is," said the barber,
the Sergius de Esplandian, the lawful son of Amadis of Gaul.
Then verify, said the curate. The merit of the father must not be put down to the account of the son. Take it, mistress housekeeper, open the window and fling it into the yard, and lay the foundation of the pile for the bonfire we are to make.
The housekeeper obeyed with great satisfaction, and the worthy Esplandian went flying into the yard to await with all patience the fire that was in store for him.
Proceed, said the curate.
This that comes next, said the barber, is Amadis of Greece. And indeed, I believe all those on this side are of the same Amadis lineage.
Then to the yard with the whole of them, said the curate, for to have the burning of Queen Quiniestra, and the shepherd of Darinel, and his eclogues, and the bedeviled and involved discourses of his author, I would burn with them the father who begot me, if he were going about in the guise of a knight-errant.
I am of the same mind, said the barber. And so am I, added the niece.
In that case, said the housekeeper, here, into the yard with them.
They were handed to her, and as there were many of them, she spared herself the staircase and flung them down out of the window.
Who is that tub there? Said the curate.
This, said the barber, is Don Olivant de Laura.
The author of that book, said the curate, was the same that wrote The Garden of Flowers. And truly, there is no deciding which of the two books is more truthful, or, to put it better, the less lying. All I can say is, send this one into the yard for a swaggering fool.
This that follows is Florismart of Hirsania, said the barber.
Signor Florismart, here, said the curate. Then by my faith, he must take up his quarters in the yard, in spite of his marvelous birth and visionary adventures, for the stiffness and dryness of his style deserved nothing else. Into the yard with him, and the other, mistress housekeeper.
With all my heart, signor, said she, and executed the order with great delight. This, said the barber, is the Knight Platir.
An old book that, said the curate, but I find no reason for clemency in it. Send it after the others without appeal, which was done.
Another book was opened, and they saw it was entitled The Knight of the Cross.
For the sake of the holy name this book has, said the curate, its ignorance might be excused. But then, they say, behind the cross there's the devil. To the fire with it.
Taking down another book, the barber said, This is the Mirror of Chivalry.
I know his worship, said the curate. That is where Signor Reinaldos of Montalvan figures with his friends and comrades, greater thieves than Cacus, and the 12 peers of France, with the veracious historian Turpin. However, I am not for condemning them to more than perpetual banishment, because, at any rate, they have some share in the invention of the famous Matteo Bardo, whence too the Christian poet Ludovico Ariosto wove his web, to whom, if I find him here, and speaking any language but his own, I shall show no respect whatever. But if he speaks his own language, I will put him upon my head.
Well, I have him in Italian, said the barber, but I do not understand him.
Nor would it be well that you should understand him, said the curate, and on that score, we might have excused the captain, if he had not brought him into Spain and turned him into Castilian. He robbed him of a great deal of his natural force, and so do all those who try to turn books written in verse into another language. For, with all the pains they take and all the cleverness they show, they never can reach the level of the originals, as they were first produced. In short, I say that this book, and all that may be found treating of those French affairs, should be thrown into or deposited in some dry well, until, after more consideration, it is settled what is to be done with them, excepting always one Bernardo del Carpio that is going about, and another called Roncesvalles. For these, if they come into my hands, shall pass at once into those of the housekeeper, and from hers into the fire, without any reprieve.
The curate does not take a kindly view toward translations, which is extraordinarily ironic, considering we're reading a translation. So it goes. To all this, the barber gave his assent, and looked upon it as right and proper, without being persuaded that the curate was so staunch to the faith and loyal to the truth that he would not, for the world, say anything opposed to them. Opening another book, he saw it was Palmerin de Oliva, and beside it was another called Palmerin of England. Seeing which, the license it said, let the olive be made firewood of it at once, and burned until no ashes even are left. And let the palm of England be kept and preserved as a thing that stands alone. And let such another case be made for it as that which Alexander found among the spoils of Darius, and set aside for the safe keeping of the works of the poet Homer. This book, Gossip, is of authority for 2 reasons. First, because it is very good, and secondly, because it is said to have been written by a wise and witty king of Portugal. All the adventures at the castle of Miraguarda are excellent, and of admirable contrivance, and the language is polished and clear, studying and observing the style befitting the speaker with propriety and judgment. So then, provided it seems good to you, Master Nicholas, I say let this and Amadis of Gaul be remitted the penalty of fire, and as for all the rest, let them perish without further question or query. Nay, Gossip, said the barber, for this that I have here is the famous Don Bellianus.
Well, said the curate, that and the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th parts all stand in need of a little rhubarb to purge their excess of bile, and they must be cleared of all that stuff about the Castle of Fame and other greater affectations, to which end let them be allowed the overseas term, and, according as they mend, so shall mercy or justice be meted out to them. And in the meantime, Gossip, do you keep them in your house, and let no one read them.
With all my heart, said the barber, and not caring to tire himself with reading more books of chivalry. He told the housekeeper to take all the big ones and throw them into the yard. It was not said to one dull or deaf, but to one who enjoyed burning them more than weaving the broadest and finest web that could be. And seizing about 8 at a time, she flung them out of the window. In carrying so many together, she let one fall at the feet of the barber, who took it up, curious to know whose it was. It found it said, History of the famous knight, Tirante el Blanco.
God bless me, said the curate with a shout. Tirante el Blanco, here! Hand it over, Gossip, for in it, I reckon, I've found a treasury of enjoyment and a mine of recreation. Here is Don Kirillesian of Montalvan, a valiant knight, and his brother, Thomas of Montalvan, and the knight of Fonseca, with the battle of the bold Tirante, fought with the mastiff, and the witticisms of the damsel of Placer de Mevidia, and the loves and wiles of the widow Reposada, and the empress in love with the squire Hippolito. In truth, Gossip, by right of its style, it is the best book in the world. Here, knights eat and sleep and die in their beds, and make their wills before dying, and a great deal more, of which there is nothing in all the other books. Nevertheless, I say, he who wrote it, for deliberately composing such fooleries deserves to be sent to the galleys for life. Take it home with you and read it, and you will see that what I have said is true."
"As you will," said the barber. "But what are we to do with these little books that are left?"
"These must be, not chivalry, but poetry,"
said the curate. And opening one, he saw it was the Diana of Jorge de Montemayor. And supposing all the others to be of the same sort,
"These," he said, "do not deserve to be burned like the others, for they neither can do nor can do the mischief the books of chivalry have done. Being books of entertainment, they can hurt no one."
"Ah, Signor," said the niece, "your worship had better order these to be burned as well as the others, for it would be no wonder if, after being cured of his chivalry disorder, my uncle, by reading these, took a fancy to turn shepherd and range the woods and fields, singing and piping, or, what would still be worse, to turn poet, which, they say, is an incurable and infectious malady."
"Okay, niece. Okay, I see how it go." I will allow a dig at the poets. I will allow it. "The damsel is right," said the curate, "and it will be well to put this stumbling block and temptation out of our friend's way. To begin, then, with the Diana of Montemayor. I am of opinion it should not be burned, but that it should be cleared of all that about the sage Felicia and the water magic, and of almost all the longer pieces of verse. Let it keep, and welcome its prose and the honor of being the first of books of the ritual. The first of books of its kind." Not sure where ritual came from.
"This that comes next," said the barber, "is the Diana, entitled the second part, by the Salamancan, and this other has the same title, and its author is Gilpolo."
"As for that of the Salamancan," replied the curate, "let it go to swell the number of the condemned in the yard, and let Gilpolio's be preserved, this, if it came from Apollo himself. But get on, gossip, and make haste, for it is growing late."
"This book," said the barber, opening another, "is the 10 books of the Fortune of Love, written by Antonio de Lofoso, a Sardinian poet."
"By the orders I have received," said the curate, "since Apollo has been Apollo, and the muses have been muses, and the poets have been poets, so droll and absurd a book as this has never been written, and in its way it is the best and the most singular of all of this species that have as yet appeared, and he who has not read it may be sure he has never read what is delightful. Give it here, gossip, for I make more account of having found it than if they had taken me a cassock of Florence stuff." He put it aside with extreme satisfaction, and the barber went on.
"These that come next are the Shepherd of Iberia, Nymphs of Henares, and the Enlightenment of Jealousy."
"Then all we have to do," said the curate, "is to hand them over to the secular arm of the housekeeper, and ask me not why we shall never have done."
"This next is the Pastor de Filida."
"No pastor that," said the curate, "but a highly polished courtier. Let it be preserved as a precious jewel."
"This large one here," said the barber, "is called The Treasury of Various Poems."
"If there were not so many of them," said the curate, "they would be more relished. This book must be weeded and cleansed of certain vulgarities, which it has with its excellences. Let it be preserved, because the author is a friend of mine, and out of respect for other more heroic and loftier works that he has written."
"This," continued the barber, "is the Cancionero of Lopez de la Maldonado."
The author of that book, too, said the curate, is a great friend of mine, and his verses from his own mouth are the admiration of all who hear them. For such is the sweetness of his voice that he enchants when he chants them. It gives rather too much of its eclogues. But what is good was never yet plentiful. Let it be kept with those that have been set apart. But what book is that next it?
The Galatea of Miguel de Cervantes.
Okay, a little bit of meta in here. This being the author of this book, said the barber. That Cervantes has been for many years a great friend of mine, and to my knowledge, he has had more experience in reverses than in verses. His book has some good invention in it. It presents us with something, but brings nothing to a conclusion. We must wait for the second part, it promises. Perhaps with amendment it may succeed in winning the full measure of grace that it is now denied it. And in the meantime, do you, Signor Gossip, keep it shut up in your own quarters.
Very good, said the barber, and here come three together. The Araucana of Don Alonso de Ercilia, the Austriada of Juan Rufo, Justice of Cordova, and the Montserrat of Cristobal de Virues, the Valentine poet.
These three books, said the curate, are the best that have been written in Castilian in heroic verse, and they may compare with the most famous of Italy. Let them be preserved as the richest treasures of poetry that Spain possesses. The curate was tired, and would not look into any more books, and so he decided that, contents uncertified, all the rest should be burned. But just then, the barber held open one, called The Tears of Angelica. I should have shed tears myself, said the curate when he heard the title, had I ordered that book to be burned, for its author was one of the famous poets of the world, not to say of Spain, and was very happy in the translation of some of Ovid's fables. All right, that brings us to the end of Chapter 6 tonight, in our first day of reading Don Quixote. This has been a lot of fun so far. I like the lighthearted tone that we get from the narrator, sort of tongue-in-cheek through everything. The blatantly round-the-bend, full-power chuny that Don Quixote exhibits, and the sometimes patient, sometimes not observations of those around him. Their reactions and interactions are every bit as fun as before. I will take great offense to the absolute litany of Spanish, French, and Italian names in that last chapter. That was a personal assault against me, I swear to God. But I do bring this upon myself. I will admit that I chose to read this book. So, I will suffer, and so will you. I did play myself. But I've wanted to read this for a while. This is such a fun book, and the story is well known, but the details are where it all comes to life. All right, guys. So this has been our first stream on Twitch. We have, for the past year, been streaming on YouTube, and we will continue to do so. Let me actually just shift our... We don't need the screen up any longer, so we'll just pop over here. So, we will continue to be streaming both on YouTube and Twitch. I don't have a whole lot of audience on either, but streaming on YouTube makes maintaining the VODs much easier. It just does it itself. So, for anyone who might be joining us, we have an entire year's worth of readings available on the YouTube channel that is linked to our profile here on Twitch. If you should find yourself interested in watching an old man struggle through books that are older than he is, you are certainly welcome to do so. Those of us on YouTube, I implore you, go ahead and drop a like on the channel, or a like on the stream, and a subscription to the channel. Let the algorithm know that we're doing some fun things. Those on Twitch, hello! I won't chill. It's too soon. It's day one. Ha-ha! Alright. So, let's go ahead and put a wrap to things here. I guess it is the Twitch thing to do, to see if there's anyone we can raid. Given that there's only a couple of us here, I doubt there's going to be a whole lot we can, but we will try. We will do our best. Same category. Look for small guys, because us littles need to stick together. Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. My Twitch schedule is going to be consistent. As Akamos will tell you, I've had a regular Twitch schedule, or a regular schedule over on YouTube, and I will continue here. It is on the channel, but we will stream from 8 to about 10 on Tuesdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays with startling regularity. We may be expanding the time zones, but for now, we are continuing with our current schedule of 8 to 10 Eastern Time on those 4 days, Tuesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So yeah, I hope you're able to join us. If not, thank you for stopping by, and yeah, we'll keep on keeping on. We'll see what we can do. Yeah, it's... life happens to all of us. Some days get missed, but I think I think we've cleared about probably 95%. Done pretty good for ourselves so far. All right, let me see if I can find somebody else that is reading tonight. You guys may not need to stick around, but it is the polite thing to do, to raid over, and that's how you network, right? Let me see who we have that is reading, hopefully. Reading or writing? Yeah, here's someone who's doing some reading. All right. Here we have one. Yeah, why not? She's reading classic lit storytime, Anne of Windy Poplars and the Wyvern Mystery. That sounds fun. All right, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Thank you very much for joining us on this, our first night of Twitch. I'll be sending you over to Snooze Button TV tonight, and we'll just say hello. All right, thanks very much, everyone. Good night, and thank you very much for joining us. Until next time, we'll be back on Friday. Oh, she doesn't like the raid. Well, let's try something else. I'm not very good at this Twitch thing. Yeah, somebody's doing story time. This is Sweet Roll Wolfie. Might as well. Let's give it a try. Okay, you know what? It may just not let me do raids at this point, or it may just be shut off, or we may be too small. I don't know. We tried. We will continue to try, and next time I'll need to do some homework on this. I'll go ahead and wrap things up. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for putting up with my scuff, and have a wonderful evening. Bye now.